Alright, here's how my perfect birthday night with my boyfriend Tom ended up as a case study in mismatched expectations. So, Tom's been going through a tough time at work, totally swamped with projects and stressed to the point that he barely has energy by the time he gets home. I wanted to do something really special for his birthday, something that would let him unwind but still feel celebrated. I thought about it for weeks and finally decided on a cozy night in, just the two of us, where he could completely relax and not worry about anything. Here's the setup I had in mind. I cooked a full 3-course meal with all his favorite foods, set up candles and fairy lights in the living room, and got this amazing bottle of wine he's been talking about. I even put together a little homemade scavenger hunt with clues leading to small gifts I'd hidden around the apartment. Things I knew he'd love, like that graphic novel he'd mentioned, a new set of headphones, and his favorite dark chocolate. In my mind, it was the perfect night. No distractions, no big plans, just a quiet, thoughtful celebration to let him know I'd been paying attention to what he needed. The day finally comes, and I'm excited. I've got everything set up, candles are lit, music's playing softly in the background, and I'm practically giddy with anticipation. I wanted to keep it a surprise. I didn't tell him anything in advance. All he knew was to come straight home after work. So he walks in, and I'm waiting there with this big grin, ready to say, "Happy birthday." But the second he walks in, I see his face fall a little. Not exactly the reaction I was expecting. "Surprise," I say, a bit tentatively, hoping he'll light up. But he just looks around and says, "Oh, this is really sweet. Thanks, babe." He tries to smile, but it feels forced. I asked if everything was okay, and he kind of shrugs, says he's just tired, and that he thought we'd be going out. That's when I realize he had probably been looking forward to something a little more exciting, maybe a night out with friends, or at least something outside the apartment. Trying to keep things upbeat, I told him I thought he'd appreciate a quiet night since he's been so stressed. I led him to the table, served the first course, and started telling him about the scavenger hunt, thinking maybe he'd get into it once he saw all the little details. But as the night went on, I could tell he just wasn't really into it. He kept glancing at his phone, looking a little distracted. Finally, after a pretty lukewarm reaction to the main course, he sighed and put his fork down. "Listen, I love that you went to all this trouble, but I just kind of thought we'd be out celebrating, maybe with a few friends or something. It just feels like, I don't know, a regular night at home." That stung. Here I was thinking I'd put together this thoughtful, intimate night, and he's basically telling me it's underwhelming. I try to hide my disappointment. "I thought you want something low-key since you've been so stressed. I wanted you to feel relaxed and just enjoy being here, without all the noise and distractions." He gave me this apologetic look and said, "I get that, but it's my birthday. I was kind of hoping for something a little more special, you know? Something to take my mind off things, not remind me of how tired I am. I wanted to feel celebrated, I guess." I felt this mix of frustration and sadness building up. Here I was thinking I'd done something meaningful for him, and now he's telling me he wanted something else entirely. But I could also see his point, even though it hurt. I probably hadn't considered that he'd want a night to let loose a little. Feeling awkward, I finally said, "Well, I thought you'd appreciate the effort. I just wanted you to have a night to unwind without having to perform for anyone." He sighed and nodded. "And I do. It's just, I kind of wanted to feel like it was my birthday, not just another night in. Maybe I could have used a little bit of that noise you were trying to avoid." We ended up sitting there, both of us a little defeated. I tried to salvage the night by suggesting we call up a few friends and maybe go grab a drink somewhere, but by then, the vibe had shifted, and he just shook his head and said he was too tired. We watched a movie in silence, both of us a bit on edge. The next morning, I tried to bring it up and apologize for missing the mark, but he waved it off, saying he appreciated the thought. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd let him down on a night that should have been all about him. I guess I planned the evening I thought he needed instead of the one he actually wanted, and now I'm wondering if I completely missed the mark. My dad recently retired after decades in a high-stress job, and honestly, he'd been struggling to adjust. For as long as I could remember, he'd been someone who thrived on routine, structure, and purpose. But since he'd stopped working, he seemed to drift. He spent most days watching TV, fixing random things around the house, or wandering around looking lost. It was hard to see him like that. This guy who'd always been so active, suddenly with nothing driving him. I wanted to help him find something new to focus on, something that would give him a reason to get out of the house and feel that sense of purpose again. So, I came up with an idea. I'd surprise him by signing him up for a weekly woodworking class. Growing up, he'd always loved making things with his hands and building little projects. I thought this would be perfect, a hobby that was creative, practical, and social. I even signed myself up to go with him, hoping it would turn into a new father-son thing we could enjoy together. After booking the classes, I picked up a nice set of beginner woodworking tools for him as a starter kit, something he could use in the class and at home if he ended up enjoying it. I was so excited to tell him and give him a way to reconnect with a hobby I thought he'd love. On Saturday, I showed up at his house, tools in hand, with a big grin on my face. "Hey Dad, guess what? I signed us up for a woodworking class together. We start next week." He looked at me, surprised. Then his face shifted from confusion to something like irritation. "You signed me up for a class?" I nodded, still smiling, thinking he was just processing it. "Yeah, it'll be great. It's just once a week, and I thought it'd be a fun way for us to spend time together. Plus, you used to love making stuff, remember?" But he didn't look happy. In fact, he seemed almost insulted. "I don't need a class, son. I've been building things my whole life. Why would I want to sit in some beginner class, learning stuff I already know?" I felt my enthusiasm deflate a bit, but I tried to explain. "Dad, it's not just about learning, it's something to do to get out of the house. You'd meet other people who like this stuff, too. I thought it'd be a nice way to spend time together." He shook his head, visibly frustrated. "Look, I know you're trying to help, but I don't need you deciding what I should be doing with my time. I've spent decades being told where to be and what to do. Retirement's supposed to mean I get to choose for myself, isn't it?" I was completely taken aback. Here I was thinking this would be the perfect gift, something he'd enjoy, and he was acting like I'd insulted him. "I didn't mean to take away your freedom or anything," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "I just thought you seemed bored, and I figured this would be a good change of pace." He sighed and softened a bit, but he still looked annoyed. "I get that you were trying to do something nice, but maybe just let me figure out what I want to do. I appreciate that you care, but sometimes support means just letting me be." I stood there, feeling deflated and honestly a little embarrassed. I'd put thought into this, planned it out, and all I'd wanted was to help him enjoy something he used to love. I didn't think he'd react like this, like I was intruding on his life, or making him feel incapable of figuring out his own path. In the end, I just nodded, said I understood, and left the tools with him in case he changed his mind. But now he's been a bit distant, and I'm left wondering if I completely misread what he needed. AITA? So, my group of friends has this long-standing tradition of going to the same cabin in the woods every winter. We've done it for years, small, rustic cabin, no Wi-Fi, a fireplace, and snow-covered trails. It's just us, some board games, hot chocolate, and a weekend of complete disconnect. It's simple, but that's what everyone seems to love about it. But this year, I thought it might be time for something different. We're older, we've got better jobs, and I thought maybe we could step it up a bit. I figured we could still do a winter trip, but why not go somewhere a little more comfortable and memorable? I'd seen a new place pop up online. A huge, modern lodge with floor-to-ceiling windows, a sauna, a hot tub, and actual beds instead of those creaky old bunks. Plus, it was close to a ski resort, so we'd have more to do. In my mind, it was a huge upgrade from our usual rundown cabin. So, I went ahead and booked the lodge. I knew it was pricier, but I was covering part of the cost to make it easier for everyone. I thought of it as a kind of gift for the group. I didn't tell anyone until the week before the trip, when I sent out a message with all the details, expecting them to be pumped. But the reactions weren't quite what I expected. Right away, my friend Pete messaged, "Oh, this looks awesome, but what happened to the usual cabin?" My other friend, Laura, followed up with, "Yeah, I thought we'd agreed on keeping it low-key. This place looks super fancy." I tried to explain, "It's still in the woods, right? We're just upgrading the experience a little. It's like our cabin, but with actual amenities. No more freezing at night or dealing with leaky roofs. Plus, there's a hot tub," but Laura didn't seem convinced. Honestly, I love the coziness of the old cabin. This looks like a fancy lodge. We don't need a hot tub or a sauna. We just want to hang out, and keep things simple. At that point, I felt like they were being dramatic. I mean, we were still going to be in a cabin, still surrounded by nature. We'd have everything we loved about the old trip, just better. So, I reassured them, saying, "Come on, guys, you'll see. This is just a way to make our tradition even better. Trust me, you'll love it." When we arrived, the place was stunning. It had huge windows overlooking the snowy forest, a roaring fireplace, and a fully stocked kitchen. I was so excited to show everyone around, expecting them to be as blown away as I was. But instead, I got a lot of tight-lipped smiles and hesitant nods. Pete took one look around and said, "This doesn't feel like us. It feels like we're staying at a hotel. Where's the charm?" I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he looked serious. I liked our old cabin, the little quirks, even the cold. That's what makes the trip special. I try to play it off, telling him, "Yeah, but isn't it nice to have a little comfort for once? We're getting older. It's okay to have a bed that doesn't give us back pain." The next morning, I suggested hitting the nearby ski resort since it was only 10 minutes away. But Laura sighed, saying, "I thought we'd just hang out, play games, and maybe go on some hikes like we usually do. We don't need to go skiing." I felt a little deflated. This place had so many cool activities nearby, and I'd figured they'd want to try something new. But instead of being excited, everyone just seemed uncomfortable. No one wanted to try the sauna, no one was interested in the fancy hot tub, and every time I suggested we do something, I got responses like, "Let's just stay in and play cards," or "I kind of miss the fireplace in the old cabin." It was like they were refusing to enjoy the amenities on purpose. Finally, that night, Pete pulled me aside and said, "Look, I know you meant well, but this doesn't feel like our winter trip. The whole point was to unplug, to just be somewhere simple, where we don't have all these distractions." I argued back, saying, "Distractions? It's a hot tub and a nice bed, not a rave. We're still here, together, in the middle of the woods. What's the big deal if it's a bit more comfortable?" But he just shook his head. "The big deal is that you changed everything without asking us. We all like the old way of doing things, but it feels like you planned this for yourself, not for us." That stung, but I was still convinced they were being stubborn. The rest of the weekend was awkward. They all seemed determined to keep things as low-key as possible, like they were rejecting everything I'd planned on purpose. They even suggested going on a long hike, just to get away from all the luxury, as Laura put it. On the last night, I finally asked them why they couldn't just enjoy the upgrade. I said, "I just wanted to make this year a little more special. Why does everything have to be exactly the same as every other year?" Laura sighed and said, "Because we loved it the way it was. That's why we do this trip every year. The simplicity is what makes it fun. We don't need all this fancy stuff to have a good time together." After we got back, I noticed things were different with the group. Pete and Laura have been kind of distant, and every time the next trip comes up, they joke about keeping it humble. I thought I was giving everyone a gift, but it's like they saw it as a total betrayal of our tradition. I'm still a little baffled, because it was just a nicer version of the same trip. Isn't it okay to want a little comfort? So, AITA for trying to make our annual trip a little more special? Alright, here's the story of how lending $700 to my friend Rachel turned into this huge, unexpected rift between us. Rachel and I have been best friends for years, always there for each other through every up and down. So, when she came to me panicked over an unexpected medical bill and asked to borrow $700, I didn't hesitate. She promised to pay it back within 2 months once she got things sorted. I sent her the money that same day, feeling like I was just doing what friends are supposed to do. At first, she was super thankful, and I honestly wasn't stressed about it. But a few weeks in, I started seeing some things that made me question her priorities. Rachel was posting on social media about going to new restaurants, buying concert tickets, and treating herself with little shopping splurges. Meanwhile, not a word about paying me back. The 2-month mark came and went, and she hadn't brought it up, so I finally sent her a quick text saying, "Hey, any idea when you might be able to pay me back? Things are getting a little tight on my end." She replied right away, apologizing, saying she was working on it and would totally have it to me soon. But somehow, I had a feeling her soon was going to be longer than she let on. A month later, with still no payment, I sent a gentle reminder. "Hey Rachel, just checking in to see if there's any update on the loan." This time, she took a full day to reply, saying, "I'm so sorry things are still tight. I just need a little more time." Hope you understand. I replied, saying I did understand, but that I could really use some of it back if she could spare even a small payment. Then, about 2 weeks after that, Rachel threw a huge party for her birthday. She invited me, and I went, thinking it'd be a low-key gathering. But she had a full catering setup, expensive drinks, and even a DJ. I was stunned. This party must have cost a fortune. People were talking about how amazing and extra it was, and she just beamed, saying she deserved to celebrate big this year. I tried to keep my cool, but inside I was fuming. Here she was throwing this huge bash, and I'm just sitting there wondering if I'm ever going to see that $700 again. By the end of the night, I couldn't hold it in. I pulled her aside and said, as gently as I could, "Rachel, I've got to ask, if you could afford all this, couldn't you at least make a payment on the loan?" Her smile faded instantly. She looked around, clearly annoyed, and said, "Are you serious? You're going to bring this up tonight?" I told her I didn't mean to spoil her night, but just couldn't ignore it anymore. It had been months with no sign of repayment. She rolled her eyes and snapped, "It's just money. Friends don't keep tabs like that. I'll pay you back when I can." I was speechless. Just money? $700 might be just money to her, but to me, it was a real dent in my budget. I told her that if she couldn't afford to pay me back yet, fine, but I'd been waiting with no updates, while she'd been out spending like it was no big deal. She just sighed, saying, "Honestly, if you're going to act this way, maybe we shouldn't do money favors anymore. It's obviously too stressful for you." After that, things got super tense. She's barely spoken to me, and mutual friends have hinted that she thinks I'm the one who's being dramatic and putting a price tag on our friendship. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here thinking maybe I was too harsh for bringing it up at her party, but also feeling like she's completely disregarding the situation and making me look bad for even asking. So, it started as a dumb joke in our group chat. My coworker and friend, Emma, had recently moved into a new apartment and was constantly bragging about how she was finally adulting with her perfectly organized space. Naturally, I saw this as a golden opportunity to mess with her a bit. I knew she was super particular about keeping her apartment spotless, like obsessive level clean, so I decided to play a little prank. One night, I got a hold of a bag of fake ants, these realistic black plastic ones that looked real from a distance. I sprinkled them around her kitchen counter when she wasn't looking and waited. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, she walked in and screamed. I was dying of laughter while she freaked out, grabbing paper towels and going on a full-on ant extermination mission. She eventually noticed they weren't moving and realized they were fake, but she was not amused. She threw the fake ants at me and yelled, "Oh, you're gonna pay for that." I thought she was just being dramatic. I mean, it was just a little harmless prank, right? But Emma isn't one to let things slide, and I didn't realize that I'd unleashed the competitive prankster in her. The next morning at work, I grabbed my coffee mug from my desk, took a big sip, and gagged. It was hot salt water. She'd dumped in a ton of salt, and I almost choked from the shock. She was at her desk across from me, biting back a smirk as I sputtered and glared at her. "Consider us even," she said sweetly. But I wasn't letting her win that easily. That weekend, I invited her over to watch a movie, and I rigged a whoopee cushion under the couch cushion where I knew she'd sit. She came in, plopped down, and the loudest fart sound filled the room. She turned beet red, mortified, while I was in stitches. I thought it was hilarious, but she looked genuinely embarrassed. "Real mature," she muttered, but she didn't say much else. I figured she'd get over it. But on Monday, I realized she wasn't done. When I went to start my computer, it wouldn't turn on. After a minor heart attack, I checked the power and found she'd unplugged every single cord under my desk, then twisted them all together in a tangled mess that took me almost 20 minutes to undo. When I finally got everything back in order, I looked over at her, and she just gave me an innocent little smile. All right, I was done playing nice. I waited a few days, then got to work. I printed out a stack of flyers that said, "Lost Cat, Answers to Mr. Sprinkles," with an absolutely ridiculous picture of an obese, grumpy-looking cat I found online. Under owner's name, I put Emma's full name and phone number. Then I went around the neighborhood and taped the flyers to every pole and bus stop I could find. I didn't actually expect people to call, but apparently they did. She got multiple calls and texts from strangers saying they'd keep an eye out for Mr. Sprinkles. She was furious. She texted me a screenshot of one of the messages saying, "This is war." I thought she'd go for a small revenge, but she went all out. The next day, I found a plastic baggie filled with crickets in my desk drawer. Real crickets. I opened the drawer and nearly jumped out of my seat as they started hopping everywhere. It was chaos, with crickets all over my desk and me scrambling to catch them. She was laughing so hard she was crying. I had to admit it was a good one, but I was also ready to end this before we both got fired. But my pride got the better of me. I decided to go for the nuclear option. Emma was always bragging about her homemade smoothies, so I figured I'd mess with her breakfast routine a bit. I swapped her protein powder with powdered instant mashed potatoes. The next morning, I watched as she scooped it into her blender, completely unaware. She took one sip and gagged, then gave me a death glare that told me I just started something I might regret. "You're dead," she hissed. That afternoon, I got back from lunch to find my chair missing. My entire office chair was gone. I searched all over, even asked a few coworkers, but no one had seen it. Finally, I checked the janitor's closet, and there it was, wrapped in layers upon layers of duct tape. It took me ages to free it, and by the time I got back to my desk, I was sweating and exhausted. At this point, our coworkers were starting to take notice, whispering and laughing whenever they saw us trying to one-up each other. Emma and I tried to play it off like it was no big deal, but I could tell she was getting tired of it too. We kept giving each other looks across the office, daring the other to make the next move. But Emma couldn't resist one final jab. The next morning, I walked into the office to find my entire desk area filled with packing peanuts. My keyboard, my chair, even my monitor, all submerged in a sea of styrofoam. I spent half the day cleaning it up, and the boss wasn't thrilled with the mess. That was it. I knew it was time to end it, so I called a truce and asked her to grab coffee after work so we could both laugh it off and agree to stop. She agreed, and we ended up having a good time rehashing the pranks, each one of us admitting how petty it had gotten. By the end of the night, we were both exhausted but laughing, relieved to have it over. But as we left the coffee shop, she smirked and said, "Truce or not, you should probably check your car." I ran out to the parking lot and saw it completely wrapped in plastic wrap, bumper to bumper. She'd apparently planned it as a last hurrah. Now every time I see packing peanuts, I have flashbacks to that morning, and anytime she makes a smoothie, I get nervous. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if we both went too far. But it was all in good fun, I think. I keep thinking if I had just gone, I wouldn't be here still turning this over in my mind. Just one night, a couple hours out of my week, and this wouldn't still be gnawing at me. I'd be able to look at Danny, to see him laugh, shake hands with his friends, and celebrate his success. And all of this would just be another memory. But I didn't go. And now it's like I'm haunted by this version of myself I didn't know existed. Someone so disconnected that I thought it was fine to shrug off an important moment in someone else's life. I remember getting his message, the way he'd poured out all those feelings I hadn't expected about how hard it was, how much the family support meant to him, and how hurt he was when I didn't show. He'd even said he'd looked around for me all night, thinking I'd show up late. And that's the part that sticks with me. He believed in me, even when I'd given him no reason to. He thought I'd be there, right up until the very end. When I replay the last few years, I see it all a little differently now. I've been the cousin who always pops in and out, who shows up when it's easy, when I have nothing else going on, and who dips out when it's inconvenient. I always thought that made me low maintenance, like I was easygoing, just living my life. But the truth is, that was a nice way of saying I was just selfish. I wanted all the benefits of closeness without any of the responsibility. And I realize now that you can't have it both ways. You can't expect people to keep you close when you've barely made the effort to stay connected. Since that night, every family gathering has felt different. People don't say anything outright, but I can tell. My aunt has stopped updating me on Danny's career moves with that same enthusiasm. His sister Beth, who's always been friendly and warm, now keeps her greetings short and doesn't make much small talk. And Danny himself, he's quiet. No more texts from him checking in or sharing little jokes we used to have. I didn't just miss one dinner. I put a wall between us that I'm not sure I can break down. It's funny, I always thought showing up for someone else's achievements was just an obligation, a formality. But now I'm starting to see it for what it is, an act of care of saying, I see you and what you've worked for matters to me too. And for the first time, I'm realizing how many moments I've missed because I thought I could get away with being the laid-back one. I thought people would understand if I didn't show up because that was just who I was. But now I see that who I was wasn't enough. Part of me wants to reach out to Danny, to tell him everything, to explain how sorry I am for letting him down, how much I regret it. I want to tell him that I get it now, that I see why he was hurt, and that I'm trying to be different. But at the same time, a part of me knows that maybe he doesn't want to hear that anymore. Maybe my words would just feel like too little, too late. I keep thinking back to all the times he's shown up for me over the years. The little things I barely noticed at the time. Like that one summer when I was struggling in school, and he offered to help me study even though he had his own classes. Or the way he'd come to every family barbecue and check in with me, asking about my life even when I didn't give much in return. He was always there, always steady, even when I was barely present. And the worst part is, he never asked me to change. He never even hinted that my presence mattered to him that much. He just showed up and hoped I'd do the same. Now I realize that he deserved better than what I gave him. He deserved someone who could see past their own convenience. Someone who would show up because they cared, not because it was easy. And instead, he got me. The cousin who thought her own comfort was more important than his big night. The one who made him feel like his success didn't matter. I guess at the end of the day, I've learned something that I'm not proud of, that I've spent years treating relationships as optional, as things that would be there whether I put in the effort or not. I thought people would forgive, would always understand, and that I could get away with just being there when I felt like it. But now I see that showing up isn't just about convenience. It's about being willing to put aside my own ego and make someone else's moment more important than my comfort. I don't know if I'll ever fully fix this with Danny, or if I even deserve to. He's moved on, and maybe he's better off not relying on someone who couldn't be bothered to support him when it mattered. And as much as I want to make things right, maybe I have to accept that he deserves the distance he's put between us. He deserves better than someone who only learned the value of showing up after it was too late. But still, I can't help but ask myself, Bella came into my life at a time when I needed her most. I'd just gone through a painful breakup, was adjusting to a new city, and felt like everything familiar had been stripped away. Then, one rainy afternoon, I wandered into an animal shelter just to look. There she was, a gentle, golden-furred mutt with a wagging tail and big, soulful eyes. She chose me that day, pressing her nose against my hand through the cage, and I knew she'd be going home with me. Now, 10 years later, Bella's been by my side through every milestone. New jobs, new friends, even my marriage to Josh. He always jokes that he had to win her approval before he could win mine. She'd been the center of my life for so long that the thought of her growing older always felt abstract, like something I'd deal with someday. But that someday was now. Over the past few months, she'd slowed down, her once bouncy steps turning into limps, her boundless energy replaced by long, tired naps. Then came the cough. At first, I thought it was just a cold, something minor, but it didn't go away, and after some tests, the vet gave us the news. Bella had lung cancer. The diagnosis was a punch to the gut, but what hit even harder was the vet's explanation. We had two options. We could make her comfortable and manage her symptoms, or we could try an intensive course of surgery and chemotherapy that might buy her some time. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year. There were no guarantees. Before I could say anything, Josh looked at me with a cautious, steady gaze. "Let's think about what's best for her," he said gently, but I could feel the resistance in my chest, my instinct to fight for her. "We can't just do nothing," I whispered, already feeling tears forming. "She deserves a chance." Josh reached over, resting his hand on my shoulder. "I know you love her. I do too. But I don't want to put her through something that could just make her last days harder." That night, the tension hung thick between us, a quiet stalemate. I threw myself into researching treatment options, reading stories of dogs who had survived chemotherapy, dogs who had beaten the odds. Every success story felt like fuel, proof that Bella could be one of the lucky ones. "Look at this," I said, holding up my phone, showing him videos of dogs who'd gone through treatment and seemed happy and healthy afterward. "It's possible, Josh. We just have to give her a chance." He looked at the videos, nodding but not saying anything, his face clouded with worry. I see what you're saying, he replied, his voice calm but hesitant. But we're talking about a really painful road, and Bella's not a young dog anymore. She might not be like the dogs in those videos. Don't you think she deserves to fight? I asked, feeling a pang of frustration. She's not ready to give up, Josh. She's still Bella. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. I just want to make sure that we're not asking her to fight because we can't handle letting go. The words hit me hard like a splash of cold water. I wanted to believe I was doing this for her, but deep down, a part of me knew he was right. I was terrified of losing her, and I was clinging to the idea of treatment because it meant more time, even if that time wasn't promised or easy. But I wasn't ready to admit that. A few days later, Josh suggested we go back to the vet together and asked her to walk us through what Bella's life would really look like if we chose treatment. The vet was kind, patiently explaining the whole process again. The surgery, the recovery, the possible side effects of chemo. She talked about the potential for good days, but she didn't sugarcoat the fact that there would be hard days too. Days where Bella might be nauseous, too weak to stand, days when she might not understand why she was in pain. Afterward, we sat in the car in silence, each of us staring out the window. Finally, Josh took my hand. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But I just need you to think about what this will mean for her, not just for us. That night, I lay down beside Bella on the floor, wrapping my arms around her and listening to her breathing. She looked at me with those same wise, soulful eyes that had drawn me to her all those years ago, and I felt a wave of love and sadness so deep it nearly crushed me. I wanted her to stay. I wanted her to live, but I couldn't ignore the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she leaned against me as if resting was all she could manage. She had always been my constant, my strength, and here she was trusting me to make this choice for her. The next morning, I told Josh that I was ready to let her go. He held me as I cried, whispering that I was brave, that Bella was lucky to have been loved so deeply. We spent Bella's last week spoiling her, taking her to her favorite park, letting her nap in the sun, feeding her treats I'd usually never allow. She seemed to perk up, and part of me started second-guessing, wondering if I was giving up too soon. But each night, I'd see her struggle to get comfortable, her breathing shallow, and I'd remember why we'd made this choice. On the last day, the vet came to our home. I held Bella close, stroking her soft fur and whispering to her that she'd been the best friend I could ever have asked for, that she'd given me more than she'd ever know. Josh was by my side, his hand on my shoulder, his own eyes red with tears. Bella went peacefully, her head in my lap, her body finally at rest. Since that day, the house feels too quiet, too empty. I keep expecting to see her curled up in her favorite spot by the window, to hear her paws clicking across the floor. I know, deep down, that I made the right choice, that I let her go before the pain overtook the joy. But part of me still wonders if I should have fought harder, if maybe I'd given up on her too soon. So I'm here, asking AITA for letting her go instead of fighting until the end, even if it meant letting her suffer a little longer? Did I choose peace for her, or did I just choose what was easiest for her? My friend Anna and I have been best friends since high school. She's one of those people who has this amazing drive, constantly setting big goals and diving into new projects. Over the years, I've watched her grow from a shy kid into a confident, ambitious woman. She's worked so hard to get where she is, and honestly, I'm incredibly proud of her. Last year, she decided to start her own business, a small bakery. Baking was her passion, and she'd always dreamed of opening her own shop. She'd saved up for years, took a small business loan, and poured herself into renovating a little storefront in the heart of town. We all chipped in to help where we could, painting walls and setting up shelves, trying out recipes. It was exciting, and I felt lucky to be a part of it. But soon after she opened, things got rough. She'd underestimated the costs of running a business, especially in an area with so much competition. She was working herself to exhaustion, baking all night and running the store all day. I could see the toll it was taking on her. She'd lost weight, was constantly tired, and seemed more stressed than I'd ever seen her. She'd call me, practically in tears, telling me about how the profits weren't coming in as fast as she'd hoped, how the bills were piling up, how she was struggling to make ends meet. At first, I just listened, trying to be supportive and encouraging. But as the weeks went on, I grew more and more concerned. I could see that she was burning out and didn't have a backup plan. She was pouring every ounce of energy and money into the bakery, and it was draining her. One night, after yet another call where she vented about the stress and barely slept, I decided to say something. I felt nervous, knowing how sensitive she was about the bakery. It was her baby, her dream, but I also couldn't just watch her go through this without at least trying to help her see the bigger picture. "Anna," I started carefully, "I know how much the bakery means to you, but maybe it's time to think about a different approach. What if you scaled back a bit or considered getting a part-time job on the side to help cover costs?" There was silence on the other end. Then she said, "You think I'm failing, don't you?" No, that's not it," I replied quickly, my heart sinking. "I just don't want to see you run yourself into the ground. You're working so hard, but maybe there's a way to make it easier on yourself. A part-time job could give you some breathing room financially until the bakery picks up more." She sighed, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. "So, what, you think I should give up? Quit my dream?" "Anna, I'm not saying give up at all. I just want you to be okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The bakery is incredible, and I believe in it. But you're barely sleeping, barely eating, and I'm worried that you're pushing yourself too hard." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I thought you of all people would get it. I put everything into this. I don't want to scale back or get a job on the side. I'm doing this full-time because I believe it can work, and I don't need you telling me to compromise." I felt a lump in my throat. "Anna, I know it's hard to hear, but I'm saying this because I care about you. I just don't want you to burn out before you get to see this succeed." "Maybe you don't think I have what it takes," she replied, her voice laced with hurt. "I thought you'd be there for me, not just waiting to tell me to give up when things get hard." She hung up after that, and I sat there, feeling this mix of guilt and frustration. I'd only wanted to help, but somehow, my attempt to look out for her had turned into an argument. I felt like I'd let her down, like I'd made her feel as if I didn't believe in her, when that couldn't have been further from the truth. I just didn't know how else to help her without watching her self-destruct in the process. Over the next few weeks, things were tense between us. She stopped calling me to talk about the bakery, and when we did see each other, it felt strained. I wanted to reach out and apologize, but I didn't even know what I'd say. I still felt like I'd done the right thing by speaking up, but I hated that I'd hurt her in the process. Then, about a month later, I found out from a mutual friend that Anna had finally decided to hire a part-time baker to help with the workload. She'd also started looking for another way to bring in some income, maybe through a catering gig or a part-time job, just to help her get through the first few tough years. I was relieved, knowing that she'd have some help and wouldn't be completely on her own anymore. I wanted to call her and tell her how proud I was of her, to tell her that I was still there to support her. But I felt this lingering guilt, worried that she might still see me as someone who doubted her, who couldn't understand her dream. I didn't want to come off as insincere or make her feel like I was saying, "I told you so." So now, we're trying to rebuild our friendship slowly. She's still passionate about the bakery, and I'm still her biggest fan. But I can't help but wonder if I should have just let her figure it out on her own. Maybe my attempt to protect her only ended up making her feel unsupported when she needed me the most. And now, I'm left wondering, AITA? My sister, Lily, and I decided we'd host a family reunion this year. The whole family hadn't been together in ages, and we thought it would be amazing to get everyone in one place again. We're pretty close, and we figured working together on something like this would be fun. Plus, we'd grown up hearing stories about those legendary family gatherings our parents used to have, and we both wanted to make this one special. We split the responsibilities up pretty easily. I would handle the venue and food, while Lily, who loves anything creative, would handle decorations, activities, and a photo booth. She talked about how she wanted to go all out with personalized signs, cozy lighting, and even a family trivia game that everyone could play together. The whole thing sounded great, and we hyped it up to our parents, telling them this would be the reunion of the decade. But as the weeks went by, things got busy. Work was piling up for both of us, and we didn't check in as much as we probably should have. We were both doing that classic sibling thing where each of us thought the other was probably on top of it. I picked a park with a covered area in case it rained, figuring that was the hard part done on my end. I even found a catering company to handle basic picnic-style food. Sandwiches, fruit platters, and drinks. Nothing fancy, but hey, I assumed the real wow factor would come from Lily's decorations and games. As for Lily, I'd see her post on social media about all the Pinterest boards she'd been making and assumed she was diving deep into her side of the planning. She didn't ask me about my end, and I didn't ask about hers. I figured if she was buying supplies, I'd see it on our shared card statement, but I hadn't checked it in a while. The day of the reunion arrived. I got to the park early with the catering order, feeling pretty pleased with myself, until I saw Lily's setup. She had a couple of handwritten signs on printer paper that read, "Welcome, family," and "Grab some food," taped to a picnic table. That was it. No decorations, no cozy lighting, and the photo booth was a sad little disposable camera she'd picked up at a drugstore on her way over. I stood there, dumbfounded. "Lily, what happened to the decorations?" I asked, trying to keep my voice down as the first few relatives arrived. "And the family trivia game?" She looked at me like I'd just asked her to solve world hunger. "I thought you were handling the games." I was just doing a few decorations, but I didn't have time to go all out. I felt my eye twitch. "The decorations?" "Lily, you said you wanted to make this feel special, remember? You said you'd go all out with lights and a photo booth." Her expression was one of pure exasperation. "Well, excuse me for not having time to plan every little thing. And by the way, this food?" She gestured at the sandwiches and fruit platters with a raised eyebrow. "Did you seriously just order stuff from a deli? Where's the home-cooked meal you said you'd do?" I felt my face flush. "Home-cooked meal? Are you kidding me? You said you'd handle the personal touches." I thought the whole point of splitting up tasks was so we could actually enjoy this instead of being stressed out. By now, more relatives were showing up, and the awkwardness was clear. People politely commented on how nice and simple it all was, which we both knew was code for underwhelming. Some people didn't even try to hide their disappointment. My Aunt Helen, who used to throw these amazing family reunions herself, asked if we needed any help setting up the rest of it, clearly expecting more than the bare picnic tables and trays of sandwiches. A couple of cousins tried to make the best of it, but I could feel the eyes on us, and it made my skin crawl. As the day went on, it only got worse. The sandwiches ran out halfway through, the paper signs got soggy and fell off in the breeze, and Lily's photo booth camera was so cheap that it broke after a handful of pictures. The trivia game we'd hyped up never happened, and people ended up just standing around awkwardly, making small talk. At one point, a few of the younger kids were literally chasing a squirrel because they were so bored. Finally, once most of the family had cleared out, Lily and I were left picking up scraps of soggy paper and empty trays. She looked at me, a mix of frustration and disappointment on her face. Well, that was not what I imagined. I couldn't hold back. "Seriously? You didn't bring any of the stuff you promised? This could have been amazing if you just put in a little effort." She gave me a scathing look. "Oh, like you're some kind of perfect planner? You threw some sandwiches on a table and called it a day. You didn't even bother asking me if I needed help with anything." That hit a nerve. I snapped back. "Why would I check in with you if you were so busy going all out? I thought I was supposed to trust you on your end." She shook her head, looking as upset as I felt. "Maybe if you hadn't just assumed I'd handle everything, this wouldn't have been such a disaster." We finished packing up in total silence, both too stubborn to admit that we'd let each other down. I drove home feeling a confusing mix of guilt, anger, and embarrassment, thinking about how our parents would have pulled off an amazing reunion without a hitch. Part of me felt like maybe I'd really dropped the ball here, but another part couldn't shake the feeling that if Lily had just stepped up a little more, we could have made it work. Now I'm wondering if I'm really the one who messed up the reunion or if we both did. AITA? A couple of months ago, my older brother, Tom, called me out of the blue. Tom's always been a bit of a wanderer, never really staying in one place or keeping a steady job. He's charming, but notoriously unreliable. Growing up, I was always the responsible sibling, the one who went to college, got a steady job, and settled down. Tom, on the other hand, preferred to live life on his own terms, bouncing from city to city, job to job, and generally living with a figure-it-out-tomorrow attitude. When he called, he sounded genuinely down, telling me he'd run out of options. He'd lost his job, his roommate had kicked him out, and he was too broke to get a place on his own. He asked if he could crash at my place just until he got back on his feet. I figured it was family, and he'd helped me a few times when we were younger, so I thought, why not? I had a spare room, a good job. I could afford to help him for a bit, right? To make things as comfortable as possible. I set up the guest room, stocked the fridge, and even made a few meals so he'd feel at home. He showed up with a huge duffel bag, gave me a quick hug, and thanked me like 10 times, saying he wouldn't forget it. I believed him, thinking this could be his chance to get things together. For the first few days, things were good. Tom would go out during the day, saying he was talking to people, looking for work, and figuring things out. He'd come back with stories about the promising leads he'd found, and it sounded like he was making progress. We'd have a couple of beers in the evening, laugh about old family memories, and it almost felt like we were kids again. I was glad I could help him. I felt like maybe this was the push he needed to finally turn things around. But by the end of the first week, I started noticing changes. Tom was sleeping in later and later, and his job hunting turned into him sitting on my couch all day, scrolling on his phone or binge-watching TV. When I'd ask how the job search was going, he'd sigh dramatically and say things like, "You don't understand, the market is tough right now," or "I've got a few irons in the fire." Then there was the mess. He'd leave dirty dishes in the sink, empty cans on the coffee table, and random clothes scattered around the apartment. I'd ask him to pick up after himself, and he'd give me a thumbs up, saying, "Sure thing, bro." But nothing ever changed. My once tidy apartment was slowly turning into a disaster zone, and I felt like I was tiptoeing around just to keep things somewhat organized. Week 2 was when things really took a turn. Tom was treating my place like a free Airbnb, complete with a stocked fridge and endless utilities. He'd eat all the food I bought, leave the fridge empty, and say, "I'll get the next round," with a wink. But he never did. Then he'd go on about how he was waiting to hear back on jobs that seemed more like wishful thinking than actual prospects. The worst part? He started inviting people over without telling me. One day, I came home from work to find 2 of his friends, people I didn't even know, hanging out in my living room, eating snacks I'd bought, and playing loud music. When I pulled Tom aside and asked him to check with me before bringing guests over, he rolled his eyes and said, "Come on, they're my friends, and it's just for a bit. Don't be so uptight." At this point, I was getting frustrated. I was covering everything, food, rent, utilities, everything, and he was just coasting. I tried sitting him down for a serious conversation about timelines and goals. I told him I needed him to contribute, or at the very least, make real progress in finding a job. He looked genuinely offended and said, "Man, I thought family was supposed to help each other out. Not everything's about money, you know?" I tried to explain that this wasn't about money. It was about showing some effort, about being considerate and responsible. He sighed, shook his head, and said, "Wow, you've really changed. You used to be way cooler about stuff." I was stunned. Here I was opening my home to him, and he was acting like I was some heartless landlord. Then came the car incident. One morning, I woke up to find my keys missing. He'd taken my car without asking, apparently for a quick errand, but he was gone all day. When he finally returned that evening, the gas tank was almost empty, and the car was covered in mud. I confronted him, and he acted like it was no big deal, saying, "I was going to fill it up, but I just forgot. Relax." At this point, I'd had enough. I told him we needed to talk seriously about him finding another place. I'd given him weeks, and there was still no job, no plan, and no respect for my space. He completely blew up, saying, "Unbelievable. I thought you were family. You act like this is such a burden. But I'm your brother." He even accused me of kicking him out, just because I didn't want to help, saying some of us don't have it as easy as you. Not everyone's as lucky. It was honestly heartbreaking. I tried everything to support him, but he was making me feel like the bad guy for setting basic boundaries. Since that talk, he's been giving me the silent treatment, barely acknowledging me around the apartment. He still uses my stuff, eats my food, and leaves messes, but now it's with this air of resentment, like I'm the one who wronged him. I'm stuck, feeling guilty for even thinking about asking him to leave, but also feeling completely taken advantage of. Part of me wonders if I should have been more patient, but another part knows he's just pushing my limits to see how far he can go. I never thought I'd be at odds with my twin brother, Alex. We'd always been close, 2 sides of the same coin. Growing up, we did everything together, same sports teams, same friends, even the same college. But after graduation, our lives took different turns. He stayed in our hometown, took over our dad's landscaping business, settled down with his high school sweetheart. I, on the other hand, left for the city, landed a job at a tech company, and built a life that felt exciting and new. A month ago, Dad had a heart attack. It was sudden, and though he's recovering, it's clear he's not going back to work anytime soon. Alex has been holding things together for our family and the business, managing clients, taking on Dad's workload on top of his own. When I went home to visit, he pulled me aside, looking more worn out than I'd ever seen him. "Listen, Sam," he said, his voice tense but hopeful. "I need your help. I can't do this alone. The business is drowning with all the extra work, and Dad's depending on us. Just until he's back on his feet. Maybe a year?" My heart sank. I could hear the weight in his words, the strain in his voice. I knew he was desperate, but the thought of moving back, leaving behind the life I'd built, it was like asking me to tear myself in two. "Alex," I said, choosing my words carefully, "I get it, I do. But my job, I've got projects I'm leading, responsibilities here. I can't just drop everything and move back. Maybe I can help out remotely? Handle the paperwork, answer client emails, anything I can do from here." He shook his head, frustration etched in his face. "Remotely? Sam, this isn't a desk job. I need you here. We're talking long hours, managing crews, meeting clients. It's physical, hands-on work. You can't do that over a phone." I sighed, torn between loyalty to my family and the life I'd worked so hard to build. I know it's a lot, and I wish I could be there. But moving back would mean giving up everything I've built here. I'm finally where I want to be, Alex. He clenched his jaw, his face clouding with disappointment. "Where you want to be?" he echoed, his tone bitter. "Must be nice, getting to chase your dreams without a second thought for anyone else." That stung. "Alex, that's not fair. You know how hard I've worked to get here. It's not like I haven't thought about coming back. But asking me to give up everything I've worked for, my career, my life here, it's just a lot." He crossed his arms, staring at me with a look that I hadn't seen before, resentment mixed with something else, something that hurt to see. "A lot? Sam, you're my brother. Our dad is sick, and I'm asking for your help. Do you really think you're going to look back on this one day and be glad you chose work over family?" I swallowed, struggling to keep my voice steady. "It's not that simple. I built a life here. I finally feel like I belong. Can you understand that?" He shook his head, his voice tight with anger. "You belong here, Sam. With us. But I guess that doesn't matter as much to you as climbing some corporate ladder." I felt the familiar burn of guilt in my chest. He wasn't wrong about the sacrifices our family had made, how they'd scraped by to put us through college, always hoping we'd stay close. And here I was, weighing my career against being there for them in a time of need. "Alex, if there's anything I can do from here, financially or hiring some extra help, just tell me," I said, trying to find some middle ground. "I don't want you to be alone in this. But I also can't give up everything I've worked for." He laughed bitterly, looking away. "Of course. Always the easy way out for you, huh? Just throw some money at it and go back to your nice city life. Meanwhile, I'm here, picking up the pieces of everything you've left behind." "Alex, that's not fair," I said, hurt creeping into my voice. "It's not like I've abandoned you. I've worked hard, just like you have. My life just took a different path. But you chose that path, Sam. You chose to leave, to build this life that doesn't include any of us. I didn't have that choice. I stayed because someone had to." We stood there, the silence between us growing heavier with every passing second. I could see the pain in his eyes, the resentment, the feeling of betrayal that I hadn't understood until now. To him, my life was a reminder of everything he'd given up, every choice he'd made out of obligation instead of desire. And I didn't know how to tell him that I'd felt the same obligation, but it had just pulled me in a different direction. I looked down, feeling the weight of his words settling into my gut. "I don't want this to come between us, Alex. I'm still here for you, even if it doesn't look the way you want. But I can't just walk away from my life. I can't give up everything I've built." He shook his head, his shoulders slumping. "Then I guess you've made your choice. With that, he walked away, leaving me standing there, the familiar warmth of our bond replaced by a cold distance I'd never felt before. I wanted to call him back, to promise him something I knew I couldn't give, but I stood there in silence, watching him disappear around the corner. Over the next few weeks, the silence between us grew. I sent him offers to help pay for extra staff, to find someone to step in until Dad was well enough to return. But he declined everything, refusing to answer my calls or texts, each rejection feeling like another brick in the wall he was building between us. And now, sitting here in my apartment, miles away from the family that once felt so close, I'm left wondering if I made the wrong choice. I can't shake the feeling that I've lost something I'll never be able to get back. I wanted a life of my own, but now I'm wondering if it came at a cost I wasn't willing to pay. So here's the setup. My older sister has always been the type to do everything by the book. Good grades, stable job, married her college sweetheart, the whole deal. And when she got pregnant with her first kid, she immediately started planning her perfect baby shower. She asked me to be her maid of honor at her wedding a couple of years back. I did the whole thing, coordinated the bachelorette, helped with the wedding planning, all of it. But after that, I kind of assumed I'd done my duty. I thought with the baby shower, she'd have it covered with her friends and other family. I didn't think I needed to go all out again. Well, my sister and my mom had other ideas. My mom called me up a couple months ago and said, "Isn't it wonderful? We're planning this huge baby shower for your sister, and we thought you would love to be the host." She said it as if I'd already volunteered, even though I hadn't been asked. It wasn't a question. It was a decision that had been made, apparently without any input from me. At first, I thought, okay, fine, I'll help organize it because I do love my sister, and it's an important moment for her. But then I got her list. She'd invited practically every friend, relative, neighbor, and co-worker she's ever known. It was a massive guest list, like a wedding all over again. And the to-do list she'd sent me was basically a full-time job. She expected elaborate decorations, customized party favors, a dessert table with a specific theme, and a big catered meal. She even hinted at hiring a photographer. I mean, I know it's a big deal, but this was way beyond anything I'd signed up for. And on top of it all, I had a big project at work with some tight deadlines, so there was no way I could handle all of that. I called my mom back, trying to explain that I'd be happy to help, but couldn't take the lead on such a huge event. I suggested that maybe we could do something more low-key, or that other family members could pitch in, but my mom wasn't having it. She went on about how much my sister needed the support right now, and how as her sister, I was obligated to make it special. She told me that it was my job to make my sister feel celebrated and supported, as if I'd somehow volunteered to be the event planner. When I kept saying I couldn't handle all of it, she finally snapped and said, "Well, I guess we know where your priorities lie." So, I backed out. I told them that I'd still attend, bring a gift, and even contribute some baked goods or whatever, but that I couldn't host the entire thing. I expected that they'd maybe be a little disappointed, but would move on. But oh no, my sister was heartbroken and made it known to everyone. Suddenly, I was the selfish sister who couldn't put family first. She sent me a long, guilt-tripping text about how she'd always dreamed of me throwing her baby shower and how she never thought I'd let her down like this. My mom kept calling, saying I was being unreasonable and that my job wasn't more important than family. They'd even started telling people I backed out. So now other relatives were texting me, asking why I wouldn't help out with such a special event. By the time the actual shower came around, I was dreading it. I showed up with a gift and a smile, trying to make peace, but I could tell things were tense. My mom barely spoke to me, and my sister was clearly doing the whole hurt and disappointed routine, making a big point of thanking everyone else who had helped. At one point, she even made a speech about how grateful she was for those who really showed up for her, pointedly looking away from me the entire time. I felt like I was at my own trial. I tried talking to her afterward, telling her that I loved her and was happy for her, but she just gave me a tight-lipped smile and said, "Maybe next time, you'll show up when it counts." Since then, my family has kept their distance. My mom's still icy. My sister hasn't returned my calls. And even our extended family seems to have bought into the idea that I'm the selfish one who abandoned her. I'm at a complete loss. I thought it was fair to set a boundary, especially given the scale of what they were asking. But they're acting like I broke some unspoken family code by not going along with every demand. So, AITA? It happened with my older sister, Sarah. We've always been close, even though we're opposites in so many ways. She's the adventurous one, constantly traveling, trying new things, and diving into big, ambitious projects, while I'm the steady one, the practical sibling, as she calls me. But despite all her big plans, she's always seemed to have it together. That's why I was so thrown off when I accidentally found out that she'd been struggling. It started when she called me one night, asking if I could watch her dog while she took care of a few things. I didn't think much of it until she dropped him off the next morning, looking worn out and distracted. She barely made eye contact, mumbling that she'd explain everything later. When she left, I felt a mix of curiosity and worry. I tried to brush it off, but something just felt off. She'd been so quiet lately, and now this? That evening, while I was walking her dog, I noticed a piece of paper sticking out of her bag. I knew I shouldn't, but I took a quick peek, thinking maybe it was an appointment reminder or something harmless. Instead, it was a notice from a credit card company, past due, with a big balance highlighted in red. My heart sank. This was so unlike her, the big sister who always has it together. It hit me that maybe she'd been struggling silently, trying to handle everything on her own. I knew she'd had some unexpected expenses with her business lately, but I'd had no idea it had gotten this bad. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense. The late-night calls, the canceled plans, the stress that had been written all over her face for weeks. When she came to pick up her dog a couple days later, I gently asked, "Hey, Sarah, are you okay with everything? I mean, with money?" I hoped she'd just sigh with relief and let me in on what was going on, but the look on her face told me I completely misread the situation. Her expression shifted from surprise to anger almost instantly. "Were you going through my stuff?" she snapped, her eyes flashing. "No, it was just sticking out of your bag," I stammered. "I didn't mean to pry, I got worried." She crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "Well, maybe you should keep your worry to yourself," she shot back. "I don't need you butting into my life like I'm some kind of problem you need to solve." "Sarah, I didn't mean it that way," I said, feeling a pang of hurt. "You've seemed stressed lately, and I just wanted to help. If you're struggling, you don't have to go through it alone." But that only seemed to make her angrier. "Do you hear yourself? Help? Struggling? You're acting like I'm falling apart, like I can't handle my own life." "Sarah, that's not what I'm saying," I protested, feeling the conversation slipping away from me. "I just don't want you to carry it all alone. You've been there for me so many times. Let me be there for you this time." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Right? You just want to swoop in and fix everything like you're the responsible one, and I'm just, what, a mess? I don't need you or anyone else treating me like I'm some damsel in distress." "Okay." I stood there, feeling the walls go up between us, thicker and higher with every word. All I'd wanted was to ease some of her burden, to let her know she didn't have to face this alone. But instead, I'd made her feel like I was judging her, doubting her ability to take care of herself. The last thing I'd wanted was to hurt her pride, but somehow that's exactly what I'd done. "Fine," I said softly, swallowing back the frustration. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel that way." She shrugged, not looking at me, and mumbled, "Just don't worry about me, all right? I'll be fine." As I watched her walk out the door, I felt this hollow ache in my chest. I'd tried to be a supportive sibling, to step up when she needed me, but instead, I'd only pushed her further away. The drive home was quiet, filled with this nagging sense of guilt and disappointment. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering if I'd gone too far, if I just made things worse by trying to help. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I'm left wondering if I crossed a line that I shouldn't have. "AITA? All right, buckle up because here we go again. My girlfriend Mia and I are in the final stretch of planning to move in together. And let's just say we have very different definitions of planning. I'm what you'd call a planner. I've got lists on lists, a budget spreadsheet, a folder full of moving company quotes, and a timeline to make sure we're ready well in advance. To me, a big move is like a puzzle. You need to put all the pieces in the right places for it to come together smoothly. Mia, however, does not see it that way. At all. In her world, moving is a figure-it-out-as-you-go thing, and the idea of mapping everything out feels, in her words, stifling. The other night, we had our first real talk about logistics. I came prepared with my moving timeline, neatly printed out, with tasks assigned by week. I was feeling pretty good about it, like, hey, look at this. We're going to be so organized. But when I handed it to her, she just laughed and said, "Are you serious? It's just a move. We can pack a few things each weekend and figure out the rest when we get closer." I tried to smile, but inside I was panicking a little. "Mia, we can't just wing it. If we don't get things set up in advance, we'll end up scrambling and stressed when the day actually comes." She rolled her eyes, still smiling. "You're stressing yourself out before we've even started. Why can't we just take it easy and enjoy the process?" And that's when I realized we were going to have a problem. Over the next few days, this theme kept coming up. I'd bring up something practical, like picking a moving company or setting a packing schedule, and she'd shrug it off, saying, "We'll get to it. Let's just handle it as we go." Every time, my anxiety would spike, because to me, handle it as we go sounds like code for invite chaos into our lives. But to Mia, it's just how things should be. Finally, I suggested a compromise. I told her I'd handle the logistics, the movers, the packing schedule, the utilities, if she wanted to focus on decorating and making the place feel like home. I thought she'd appreciate the idea of a division of labor that would let her focus on the fun stuff. But instead, she looked at me with this almost offended expression. "I don't want to be in charge of just decorating," she said, frowning. "I want to be part of all of it, but not like this. I just don't see the point in turning this into a huge project when it's supposed to be exciting." I felt my stomach sink a little because I genuinely thought this was a great compromise. "I'm not trying to make it a project," I explained, doing my best to sound calm. "I just want to make sure we're prepared. The last thing I want is for us to be stressed at the last minute." But she wasn't convinced. "I just think you're going to burn us both out by overplanning. If we get too caught up in the details, we'll lose all the excitement of moving in together." Since then, it's been a back and forth of many compromises, neither of us fully satisfied. I've agreed to hold off on booking movers and picking a moving date until we're closer, even though it makes me anxious. Meanwhile, she's humoring me by starting to pack a few boxes each week, mostly with things we don't use every day. But every time I bring up another detail, like setting up utilities or figuring out the layout of our furniture, she gets this glazed over look, like I'm speaking another language. A few days ago, we had our most heated argument yet. I'd found a moving company with a great reputation and a decent rate, and I wanted to go ahead and book them to lock in the date. I thought she'd appreciate that I'd found a reliable option, but instead, she just looked annoyed. "Why do we need to book movers this early?" she asked, crossing her arms. "We're not moving for weeks." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool, because if we wait, we might not get the date we want, or we'll end up paying more. This way, we know it's set. She shook her head, looking exasperated. "You're making this way more complicated than it needs to be. We don't need to treat it like an operation. Moving's always a bit messy. Why not just let it be?" In that moment, it felt like we were on opposite sides of a canyon. To me, planning ahead is what makes a big transition like this less stressful. But to her, my planning feels like an extra layer of stress that's taking the fun out of something exciting. And I realized that we weren't just clashing over a move. We were butting heads over how we each deal with change. After that, we took a cooling off day and didn't talk about the move at all. When we finally sat down again, I told her that I was willing to back off on some of the timelines and let things happen more naturally if that's what she really wanted. But I also asked her to trust me with a few things like setting up utilities and booking the movers, just so I could have a few anchors of certainty. She agreed, but I could tell she wasn't thrilled. "I'll let you handle some things if it makes you feel better," she said, almost reluctantly. "But I still feel like this is turning into way too much. I want moving in together to feel like we're starting a new adventure, not like we're checking off boxes." That hit me hard. I didn't want her to feel like she was just a passenger on this ride I'd organized. I wanted her to feel as excited and invested as I was. But at the same time, I couldn't fully let go of the feeling that if we didn't cover our bases, we'd be setting ourselves up for stress down the line. So now we're trying to walk this tightrope of compromise. She's promised to let me handle a few essential logistics, and I'm doing my best not to turn every conversation into another checklist review. But every time I try to go with the flow, I can't shake the image of us scrambling on moving day, wondering why we didn't plan better. Meanwhile, she's doing her best to support my need for organization, but I can tell she still thinks it's overkill. She keeps making comments about how maybe we're missing the point of moving in together, which feels like a subtle dig, even if she doesn't mean it that way. And now, I'm honestly questioning myself. Am I really making this more stressful than it needs to be? Or is she being too relaxed about something this important? Part of me feels like my planning is what's going to make this transition smoother, but another part of me wonders if I'm just bulldozing her excitement with all my lists and schedules. Alright, here's what went down at my best friend Kate's promotion celebration last weekend. I thought I was just adding to the conversation, but now people are acting like I totally missed the mark, so I'm here to get a second opinion. So, Kate and I have been friends since college, and she just got promoted to a senior role at her marketing firm. She's been working hard, and she's always been super ambitious, so I was genuinely happy for her. She invited a bunch of us over to her place to celebrate. Friends, co-workers, and some family members. Everyone was hyping her up, and I figured it would be a chill night with some champagne, snacks, and good vibes. When I got there, the room was buzzing, and people were toasting her left and right. Her mom gave this whole speech about how proud she was of Kate, how she's been driven ever since she was young, and how this was just the beginning of her success. It was sweet, and everyone clinked their glasses and cheered. I was genuinely impressed because Kate had put in a lot of hours for this promotion, but I also couldn't help but feel like the entire evening was starting to turn into this big pedestal moment for her. I mean, we've all had to work hard, right? When it was my turn to give a toast, I raised my glass and said, "Here's to Kate. You've done an amazing job, and I totally get how hard it's been. I remember all those nights I was grinding for my own promotion and how much effort it took to stand out in a competitive field. You've put in the time, and you deserve it." I figured she'd appreciate hearing that her hard work was something I could personally relate to. But she just gave me this awkward smile, and I noticed a few of her co-workers exchange glances. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I just caught her off guard. Later, Kate's boss was talking about her rise in the company and how she was going to go even further. The other guests were all nodding and saying things like, "You're such an inspiration, and we always knew you'd make it big." It was like she was this trailblazer among us, which sure, it's great that she got the promotion, but it's not like she's curing diseases or anything. I joined the group and said, "It's fantastic to see all this support. I know I had to fight tooth and nail to get my last promotion, and that really taught me resilience." It's amazing to see Kate climbing her way up too. Kate's smile seemed a bit tight, and her mom actually gave me a look, but nobody said anything, so I thought I was just being friendly and supportive. I mean, isn't it okay to acknowledge that everyone has their own hard-won battles? At one point, someone asked Kate about her career path, and she started explaining how she'd taken a risk by moving into this company a few years back, even though it meant starting at a lower level. She talked about how she'd been willing to start from scratch and prove herself, and everyone was totally impressed. I'll admit, it reminded me of my own journey, so I added, "Yeah, that takes guts." When I switched industries, I had to start from the ground up too, and it was definitely a character-building experience. But, hey, it's worth it if you keep pushing. Kate didn't say much, just nodded politely, and then excused herself to go grab a drink. At this point, I was starting to feel like maybe my comments weren't landing well, but I honestly didn't know why. I was just sharing my own experiences, trying to show her that I knew what it felt like to work that hard and succeed. Later, Kate's sister pulled me aside and said, "You know, it's really great that you're here to support Kate, but maybe just let her have this night? It feels like every time someone praises her, you bring up how hard you work too." I was kind of shocked. I told her, "I'm just relating to her experience. It's not like I'm trying to take anything away from her." Her sister gave me this exasperated look and said, "Yeah, but tonight's supposed to be about her, not about showing everyone how hard you work too. Maybe just let her enjoy the spotlight." I felt kind of blindsided, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just being overly sensitive. Still, I decided to keep a low profile for the rest of the night and mostly hung back, watching Kate bask in all the attention. I was happy for her, but a small part of me felt like no one was really seeing the bigger picture, like everyone in that room had worked hard in their own ways, right? It's not like Kate's the only person who's ever put in late nights. When the night was winding down, I went over to congratulate her one last time, and I said, "I'm genuinely so happy for you, Kate. It's amazing what you've accomplished." I thought I'd keep it simple, but she gave me this sort of tired smile and said, "Thanks. I really wanted tonight to be about celebrating this moment, you know? Sometimes it felt like you were more focused on comparing our journeys than just celebrating with me." I tried to laugh it off and said, "Oh, come on, Kate. I was just trying to show you I get it. I thought you'd appreciate having someone who understands what it's like to work so hard." But she shook her head and said, "It's not about understanding. Sometimes it feels like you're always trying to remind me that you've worked harder or that your path was more challenging. Can't I just have this one night without that?" She walked away after that, and I left the party feeling genuinely confused and, honestly, a little hurt. I mean, why is it wrong to acknowledge my own experiences just because it's her night? If anything, I thought I was giving her a compliment by showing how much I could relate. It's not like I made a big speech about my own accomplishments. I was just trying to join the conversation. Now she hasn't texted me since the party, and a mutual friend hinted that maybe I'd missed the mark with my comments. But I'm genuinely struggling to understand what I did wrong. Am I supposed to just pretend like I don't know what it's like to work hard too? I was just trying to be supportive in my own way. So, AITA for mentioning my own career journey at my friend's celebration. Or is everyone just being overly sensitive?